I'll try not to pontificate. If I adopt a certain tone, I'm sorry, you'll probably recognize it if you hear it anyway. I have certain concepts I would like to put on record, if you don't mind. This one is an analytical device that compartmentalizes different aspects of fiction and reality as a progenitor of all fiction into arbitrarily 7 layers of complexity, 7 layers of storytelling. Special effects reveal. Look at those stupendous production values. That was a scripted joke. Since fiction is very much modeled after reality, both could be said to share certain common structural traits. Any fiction and reality, like any fiction, has its own layers of complexity, layers of perception, if you will. Imagine yourself starting on the ground level in a press surrounded by other people. You see nothing beyond a few inches in front of you, their bodies, their backs, their faces in the best case scenario, but mostly the backs of their heads. And the furthest you can see is if you lower your head and look down at your own feet from your body height. You might see something interesting on the ground if you happen to stumble over it by chance, but that's about it, and that's your life. Then suddenly you start rising upwards as if levitating by magic, and from a higher vantage point you begin to see the flow of the crowd, more faces of more people, if maybe somewhat less up close and personal as the distance between you and them grows. You continue up and the landscape opens in front of you. The buildings, the skyline, the hills, rivers and valleys are now visible to you. The way topology affects architectural planning of the city and the outskirts, the rough function of every facility and every patch of land, the transport lines and other communications connecting those nodes. If you keep on rising, you'll begin to discern even the larger scale geographic features, mountain chains, the shapes of large bodies of water and the motion of the currents, shapes of the shorelines of islands and continents, eventually oceans and the planet itself, her place within the cosmic dance and so forth. As you climb, the more intricate details become washed out, blurred and less discernible overall. But the shift in perspective allows you to see patterns of a larger scale, to understand the world in a way inaccessible before. There's distinct layers of elevation to this perspective, if admittedly still somewhat arbitrarily divided. For fiction and life as well, I would identify 7 of them. Layer 0 is what the writer wants. Ego. This is what you carry in your heart before starting a project, be that writing or art or anything else really. The motives for your work, the themes, the ideas you hope to explore and realize, the beliefs you want to share with others, your point of view, your artistic ambition, your desire to impress, hopes to strike it rich and famous, hopes to create something that just might outlast you in some way, or maybe something more modest than that. It's your vision for the piece you intend to create, your planning, research. This is what you dream your world would look like. This is what you want your story to look like, the truths in your heart yet to be expressed. And then layer 1 is what actually happens. Generation loss. Here is the layer of miscommunication between ideas in your mind and your ability to communicate and realize them. So deeply limited by your skill as an artist, a writer, a speaker, a craftsman, you can't losslessly express your intentions, your ideas through actions or language. There's layers upon layers of generation loss, miscommunication and misunderstanding embedded in every interaction between you as an intelligent agent and the outside world or other people. Even formulating your goal in your own mind is a challenge. You try, you fail inevitably, and out of that failure something else is born, sometimes positive, other times counterproductive. Something you may have never anticipated either way. One of the many important aspects of artistic mastery, if I may speculate, seems to be not so much to reduce the loss during transfer of information as to learn how to ride that wave of miscommunication in a constructive manner. Those accidents, happy or not, that write your story with you by almost pushing your hand in some or another unexpected direction. So the first layer is the collection of events, the way they unfold, intentional or not, deliberate or random. Layer 1 is the narrative in the best way you manage to put it on paper, a somewhat barely controlled disaster. Meanwhile, the world and the characters pull you in their own direction, perhaps several at the same time. Layer 2 is what the characters want. Empathy. Humans are impenetrable black boxes of random wonder. If you so much as attempt to study them, you end up breaking them apart, spilling all the content. Even if, instead of taking whatever they say or do at face value, you try to understand the motives behind those words and actions, you always inevitably have to square off against the limits of their own ability to understand themselves. Layer 2 is to try and put yourself in the perspective of a character or of another person, to imagine what it would feel like to be them. The layer of empathy to the best of your abilities within the immediate as well as the medium to long-term context of the event. Within the stories, it's the motivations of the characters. Everything from noblest of heroics to petty acts of spite is born on this layer. The way we're wired to act and react to the events of individuals, our wants and needs, our individual perspective. Make a jump to group dynamics, however, and you find yourself on layer 3, what the rest of the world wants. The conspiracy layer. People, animals, cells form groups to pool resources and to act out behaviors inaccessible in solitude. Here lie interactions within tribes and between the tribes, systems, ideologies and private enterprise, hierarchies, institutions of power, all the various configurations of society or any collective. Layer 3 is about the complexity of relations, the conflict between the group and the individual, every war ever fought, every hero recorded in the memory of their tribe, and every villain reflected in the eyes of others, selfish or selfless. It's the layer where personal or tribal moral frames of reference resolve into real-life actions, policies, and their consequences, where subjectivity, taken to the extremes of collective self-delusion, propagates through childhood indoctrination called education, where every misunderstanding that has ever occurred in the history of the world is being put on display, not as a distant historical anecdote, but as ideological dogma that has to be followed or else. It's also the layer of love, of friendship, of promise and commitment, team effort, societal resilience in the face of hardship and adversity, etc., etc., etc. The desire to connect and the miscommunication resulting from it make the third layer, together with the layer before, into a fertile substrate for breeding and feeding of. Layer 4, gods and demons. Large concepts and archetypes born from human psyche that live rent-free in people's minds and exercise their own peculiar form of intelligence by hijacking ours, a whole pantheon of them and counting, hustling in the mimetic ecosystem of their own, governed just as much as other living things by natural selection, the priorities of survival and growth. Here roam various egregore entities born through miscommunication, not supernatural ghosts or angels, but still monsters in their own right, unattainable ideals, mind viruses, linguistic parasites like the idea of evil, justice, equality, and others, perhaps originally invoked a long time ago for nothing more than rhetorical convenience to describe a subjective point of view in more impressive terms like good and righteousness, still used for the same purpose to this day. These vague concepts have spawned such a vast range of contradicting interpretations as to become their own source of self-perpetuating conflict. They are the roaches living in your mind kitchen, so huge and old they don't bother scurrying off when you switch on the lights. Why should they be afraid of you? You be afraid of them. Your whole character is built on taking them for granted as a natural, familiar, or even favorite part of the interior. Try re-examining them and see what happens. They'll leave you sobbing on the floor, gasping for air every single time. Try them. Layer 4 is the multitude of ideas shaped by generation loss, shaped by miscommunication. Even if you were to name all the original authors, like the fabled inventor of the wheel, their ideas have passed through so many minds and reinterpretations, repurposed and transformed so much and so many times none may claim the singular ownership. These are our collective children, our predators, as well as the idols we worship. Layer 5. The rules of the universe. Truth. 1 + 1 = 2. Triangle is a set of 3 points in space connected with straight lines, structures and logical statements that will remain true no matter what, no matter the perspective or semantics or anybody's opinion on the matter. With one soft exception I could think of being fictional laws and rules that make no sense or unlikely to exist in our version of reality, while being irrefutable truths in fiction due to the author's say-so when they choose to put the boot down, all else be damned. The mechanics for every cause and effect, structure/relationship are here, on the 5th layer. Not the events themselves. Layer 5 is not about the transient, but the configuration of the world that allows events of a certain kind to take place. Why something, but not the other, happens, yet the why not in the abstract sense of what does it all mean, but in the concrete of this behavior leads to such and such outcome, this event dominoes into such and such repercussions down the line. The physical laws, but also I think the golden rule and its derivatives are closer to layer 5 than layer 4, as in more of a universal law than ideology, and it kind of makes sense, but I don't think I can definitively prove it even if I tried. It's a complex problem, maybe someone else will figure it out. Next, I think, layer 6, the creation of the universe, cosmogony. Layer 6 in principle is fairly straightforward. It's the cosmogony of the world, the creation myth. Your big bangs, your theories of everything go here. The cosmic brood cows that have birthed the world out of nothing, the multiverses, the turtles all the way down. How is there something rather than nothing? Simulation theories, Boltzmann body parts, solipsism with all of its frustrating irrefutability, where most educated and reasonable, high-functioning people collectively decided simply not to think about it and look for answers somewhere else. Layer 7, the creator of the universe, ego. We've come full circle. If you use this framework for analysis, you should be able to recognize how much effort and perhaps skill any particular author put into their work. The depth and interplay of concepts and themes should be a little bit clearer if you split them into layers like this, hopefully. Not every piece requires of the author to go and tinker into the cerebral weeds of layer 3 and 4. And layers 5, 6, and 7 often adopt the default settings of our normal world, maybe heightening it up to a minor degree to support the fantasy. It's fine. There is a certain depth of complexity to every work of fiction, beyond which it makes no sense to go, depending on the intended audience and the author's own preferences, as well as the time and resources available in the format chosen. You don't detail the backstory of every background character. You don't explain how exactly every single fantastical device works. You don't describe every twitch of the face, every squeak of the floorboards, every minor detail unrelated to the narrative when you write. You put the frame on what's important, what's interesting to you as the author, and maybe interesting to the audience, and imply the rest. Like drawing distance in video games, you save resources of your machine by omitting irrelevant details that are too far to interact with in any meaningful manner anyway. And through the choices you make, your own character is revealed in your work. As your priorities expose you to a careful mind, you can't really hide anything. You can't lie to yourself either. It is what it is. So there's that. It takes some substantial time and effort to write one of these articles, particularly with my stupendous production values on the editing and narration side, and the writing itself, of course. I know it's going to be messy, but you have to plant the tree someday, somehow, to the limits of your best efforts and hope. If you don't do it now, you may never have the chance to do anything. And when it's time to weigh your heart on the scales, it may end up way too heavy for your own good. But hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. I wish you to be safe, healthy, and alive. Goodbye. Oof, I feel I fell asleep there by the end. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. Good day.